Dear participants, we open the session for Roundtable 2 of the GCM Regional Review in the UNECE region. Welcome. With apologies for the slight delay, we had a technical issue. We accept more participants to join in the next couple of minutes, but we need to start since we are late. Thank you to the panelists who are there already for your time and your patience. I'm the technical moderator of this session. My name is Julian Pfeffling. I am with the IOM here in Geneva. Together with Elisa Zakiri, another colleague, she's also technical moderator. We will give the floor, we will look at the speakers list. If you want to speak after the panel, please write us a message or press the request to speak button. We will take note of your request and put you on the speakers list. Elisa will be in touch with those who want to speak. With these housekeeping rules, I'd like to welcome the panelists once again. I'd like to introduce the chair, the moderator of this panel, Mr. Andrew Geddes. He's Director Migration Policy. It's a Migration Policy Center at the European University Institute. He has led and participated in a number of major projects on aspects of international migration, working with a wide range of academic and non-academic partners. Mr. Geddes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this second round table. The focus for this session will be on GCM objectives 2, 5, 6, 12, and 18. So what we'll be talking about are adverse drivers, flexible pathways to regular migration, facilitation of fair and ethical recruitment, safeguarding conditions to ensure decent work, strengthening certainty and predictability in migration procedures, and investment in skills development and mutual recognition of skills. It's a very full agenda, and to deal with some of those issues, we have a panel of 3 very distinguished speakers. So I'll introduce the speakers to you in the order in which they will speak.
Andrew?
Yeah?
Can I be rude and interrupt? You need to go closer to your microphone.
So to introduce the speakers in the order in which they will speak, the first speaker will be His Excellency Mr. Birjan Nurimbetov, who is the Minister of Labour in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Prior to assuming this role as Minister of Labour, he was first Deputy Chairman of the Republican Union of Trade Unions, Vice Minister of Labour and Social Protection of Population in the Republic of Kazakhstan, and Vice Minister of Health and Social Development. He will be followed by Ms. Renata Hornung-Draus, who is Managing Director for European and International Affairs at the International Organization of Employers. She's also Chair of the Committee on Employment, Labour and Social Affairs of the Business Industry Advisory Group Committee to the OECD, Vice Chair of Business Europe Social Affairs Committee, and Chair of Business Europe's Corporate Social Responsibility Committee, and Vice President of the International Organization of Employers and Employed Vice Chair of the ILO Governing Body Subcommittee on Multinational Enterprises. The third speaker will be Ms. Liva Baboven, who is Director of the ILO Office for the EU and Benelux countries. Before joining the ILO office in Brussels, Ms. Baboven worked as a federal labour mediator at the Belgian Federal Public Service for Employment, Labour and Social Dialogue, chairing joint committees at sectoral level between representative workers and employers' organisations, and acting as conciliator in collective labour disputes. So I'm very happy to welcome all our distinguished panellists and would like to offer the floor to Mr. Nurimbetov.
Thank you. This is again me, the moderator. Can the Ministry of Labour in Kazakhstan please press the request to speak button again? You were online, but then disappeared again. I can't see they are online. I keep watching, so please can the permanent mission assist? I see the representative being on the floor. And in the meantime, are they online now? Can someone of the team just make sure the Kazakhstan mission is online and they receive my what I asked them? Otherwise, we okay. We seem to have a technical issue with the connection. Andrew, you might want to give the floor to the next panelist, and then we come back to the minister.
Okay, we appear to have a technical issue, so I would like to invite Ms. Renata Hornum-Brau to speak.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all right, because I don't use a headset, but I hope that's okay. First of all, just let me say there was a bit of a merger and confusion. I am managing director for European and International Affairs of the German employers, BDA, and that's why I'm speaking from Berlin. And I am vice president of the ILO. I know it was wrong in the notes. Don't worry, Andrew. We tried to correct it, but maybe it got stuck somewhere on the way. I also sit on the governing body of the International Labour Organization. So hello, Lieve. Nice to see you. And I have been very much engaged also in, especially in the 90s, in the European University Institute. So I suppose you're sitting in this wonderful Badia Fiessolana, Andrew. Great. So let me just say, I speak here now on behalf of the International Organization of Employers, which is the world's largest network of employer organizations, with over 140 member organizations from just as many countries. And the International Organization of Employers has also been the manager and the host for the business mechanism of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, and contributed actively to the Global Compact on Migration. So I would like to give you now the perspective of employers on the Global Compact on Migration, and where we see the priorities to be set in the implementation or in the further promotion of this framework. Because after all, it is about recommendations to member states and also to social partners. It's not a prescriptive text. The first point I would like to make is that not all recommendations apply equally to all countries, as the situation in countries is very different. I am vice president of the IOE for the region of Europe and Central Asia. And already within Europe, we have countries with a very different profile. And of course, when we go to Central Asia, it's even more different. There are certain countries which are mostly receiving countries, in Western Europe mostly, where there is a shortage of skilled workers. But then there are countries inside the EU, the new member states, but also outside the EU, who are mainly sending countries. And these countries are faced with very different challenges. On the one hand, of course, labor migration can help ease unemployment and reduce unemployment in the country itself while the country is trying to build up. But at the same time, the brain drain, which comes with labor migration, because after all, it's the qualified workers the Western European countries need, is of course seriously hampering economic development in these countries. And we have very tough discussions already inside the EU between the mainly sending countries and mainly receiving countries, because the sending countries tell us, especially the Baltic countries, but also the Southeast European member states of the European Union, they tell us, listen, if you take all our doctors, all our nurses, all our engineers, all our skilled work, we don't have the manpower in our own country to build up our economy and to catch up with you. And that's a real dilemma which the global level needs to bear in mind and to take care of. The second point I would like to make is that there needs to be a very clear distinction between labor migration on the one hand and humanitarian migration, in other words, refugees and the subsidiary people coming under subsidiary protection from civil war situations on the other hand. So companies are, of course, very committed to help with the integration of refugees and of those under subsidiary protection. They provide employment, they help with skills, but they cannot do everything. They need, of course, a framework which comes from the government, from the public instances, which gives a certain basic tuition of language, basic skills, but also especially basic cultural skills, let me put it that way, or learning or education, because integration is only possible if the cultural gap is not too big and if the migrants accept the culture of the receiving country. Now, what companies are facing now, as they are increasingly operating on a transfrontier and global scale, they want to have an easy and unbureaucratic possibility for mobility of their own staff. And here we have problems which have come from, they have come first of all now from the current crisis with the corona virus, because many countries closed their borders to somehow stop the contagion and stop the progression of the crisis, of the virus rather. And this has, of course, made it very, very difficult, even inside the EU, even cross-border workers who were crossing the border, living in one part of the EU and crossing the border to the other part, to the other country every day, have been suddenly faced with huge problems and huge obstacles. And that's the kind of obstacles where we believe that a EU or even a global framework should help, and global policy making and coordination should help alleviate these bureaucratic obstacles to mobility for companies. And this is not a mass mobility, obviously. It is not about big masses of people, but it is the possibility for companies, and especially for SMEs, which don't have the money to pay for huge departments that do all the bureaucracy to get visa, to get A1 certificates inside the EU and so on, to just have a simple possibility for mobility of their staff. One important point we want to make is that the simplification of these immigration processes, which have become extremely heavy, can be facilitated through technology, certainly, with whatever online visa, which can happen more quickly and so on, so that the public administrations are really in need to modernize their systems and to make them a bit more user-friendly and less bureaucratic. Also, this applies to the entire administrative infrastructure, where companies meet huge obstacles simply because the administrations don't have the capacities to actually deal with the requests for migration and for the visa or all the certificates necessary for work permits and so on. Now, I already said the integration of migrants, also of labor migrants, depends very much on the acceptance by the resident population. And this makes it very, of course, it's all the more easier where the differences between the cultures, if the cultures between the sending country and the receiving countries are small, but the bigger the differences are, the bigger the challenges are, and the more work needs to be done to facilitate the integration and also to have it accepted by the resident population, which should not be threatened in its own cultural identity. This is a particular challenge also for low-skilled migrants. And here I think one very important point which the Global Compact for Migration is making is that there should be a level playing field with national workers. So there should be fair recruitment. They should have, the low-skilled migrants should have fair working conditions. And also very important is to combat informality. Unfortunately, the economic crisis triggered by the measures against the coronavirus has really pushed to new heights the informality, as people were losing their formal jobs, and the supply chains, especially in the developing countries, were disrupted seriously. And this creates a huge problem also in terms of integrating migrant labor workforce in the receiving countries. To conclude, I would like to say that it is important to always stress that migration, including labor migration, is not an end in itself. And sometimes this seems to be forgotten, but the UN should support member states facilitating migration where it makes sense. It should not become a kind of ideological organ which says migration is good at any price, because that can lead to really adverse effects when the acceptance of the resident population is in danger. So where the workforce is needed, where it can be integrated into the labor market and into the societies of the receiving countries, it is very important that we have global coordination to facilitate migration. But again, we need to distinguish between labor market, economic migration, and humanitarian migration. And obviously, I'm not dealing with humanitarian migration now, because this is not the object of the Global Compact for Migration. There's another compact on refugees, which is dealing with this humanitarian issue. But I think it's very important to clearly separate these two fields, just to avoid misperceptions and misunderstandings. And I think that will be very important also for the future of the implementation of this Global Compact on Migration. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. I understand from the technical moderator, Mr. Nurinbekov is now available, and I invite him to take the floor.
Andrew?
Yeah?
It seems the minister is not yet able to speak.
Okay,
so
shall I just carry on then?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
The next speaker on the panel and come back to the minister.
Okay. We still seem to be having some technical difficulties, so I would like now to invite Ms. Lieve Verboven from the ILO, the Office for the EU and Benelux countries, to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues. Thank you for inviting the ILO to participate in this first UNECE regional review of the Global Compact on Migration for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Now, the Global Compact stresses the importance of providing decent work for migrants, whether in origin, destination, or transit countries. And it also stresses the central role of improving labor migration governance. Now, I would like to recall that many migrant workers are concentrated in sectors that are characterized by high levels of temporary, informal, and unprotected work. And that was already indicated during the UNECE informal stakeholders consultation earlier this week, November the 9th. So therefore, I like to stress that the adherence to international labor standards to protect migrant workers' rights and to implement decent work principles for all remains critical, especially to help ensure that migrant workers and their families receive a fair share of the benefits of labor mobility. And this adherence to the international labor conventions of the ILO was also stressed, I believe, this morning in the opening session by the Secretary General of PICAM. Hi, Mr. Minister of Kazakhstan. Happy that you're joining us. Thanks. I'm Lieve Verboven from the ILO. I'll continue with, as I've been given the floor. It's clear that the COVID-19 pandemic is having a dramatic impact on economies and societies, resulting in serious business disruption. And migrant workers too are experiencing job losses, and many are forced to return to even more fragile labor markets, putting their livelihoods at great risk. And this was already told by the previous speaker. It's also pushing informality higher. And this is the reason why bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation remains essential for promoting human and labor rights of migrant workers and to ensure regular pathways. Now, cooperation can help to support regular admissions and effective work visa policies, social protections and skills portability to better respond to business and labor market needs. Now, we find that the bilateral labor migrations agreements that are rights-based and gender responses, they can effectively facilitate this cooperation between origin and destination countries to both protect migrant workers and help them to contribute to and benefit from socioeconomic development in a fair and equitable manner. Now, these bilateral labor migration agreements would be even more beneficial if they are based on social dialogue. So with input from workers and employers organizations. Now, we recognize that there are also shortcomings in these agreements regarding sometimes the design, the content, monitoring and implementation of them. So that's why the ILO, together with IOM, is leading a multi-stakeholder thematic working group under the UN Network for Migration to help support states in strengthening these bilateral labor migration agreements. Now, the working group members are currently developing practical guidance to support member states in negotiating, designing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating these rights-based, gender-responsive bilateral labor migration agreements. And it is expected that this guidance will be published early next year. So we will support the piloting of these guidance with interested governments. So in a way, this is an open invitation to governments to join, and we hope that the countries in the EC region will join us in this effort. Now, we see that skill shortages and gaps are often the reason and one of the main reasons for entering in such bilateral labor migration agreements. And at the same time, we see that they're often among the most overlooked aspects in the agreement itself. And that's why at the ILO, we have developed a guidance for skills modules in these agreements. I'm just showing the brochure, but I know in the chat box there will be a link because these guidelines, it's a practical guidance. They refer to the skills that are often possessed by migrant workers that need to be recognized, matched, and then further developed with those in demand in the destination country's labor market. So the matching there is important. And also the gender perspective is important because in particularly the issues that women migrant workers face regarding their skills recognition and development is also captured. Now, in the area of skills development and recognition of migrant workers, the ILO has joined forces with IOM, UNESCO, and the International Workers and Employers Organization, so also with the organization of IOE and ITUC. And what we did is forge a global skills partnerships, and that aims to mobilize technical expertise of the member organizations towards supporting governments, employers, workers, and others, like educational institutions, trainings providers, to develop and recognize skills of migrant workers with particular focus on women and youth. So those are some of the bigger things that ILO is doing in cooperation, and we can also illustrate that with what's happening in the field, in the region. For example, with IOM, UN Women, we implement a project in Kyrgyzstan to empower women and girls that are most vulnerable to migration. Improve their participation in inclusive community development, enhancing their access to socioeconomic opportunities, etc. And then also another example is in Turkey, where we're supporting the government in a range of activities to improve decent work opportunities for migrant workers. And those migrant workers are often driven by crisis and refugees. And it includes their skills development, employability, innovative approaches to help businesses deliver social protection to these workers. And then also what's very important in the cooperation and technical development on the field is that ILO has expanded its work with countries from which migrants usually originate to Europe, and this is particularly in the African region. Now, the Global Compact also recognizes the centrality to promote fair recruitment. And ILO, with its constituents, has made significant progress in advancing the Fair Recruitment Initiative to eliminate recruitment fees and costs that can lead to the worst forms like debt bondage, forced labor, and human trafficking. And also now in times of COVID-19, what we did, we have an ILO policy brief on ensuring fair recruitment during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have identified good practices in the European region in relevant areas such as regulation, but also where social partners have taken initiatives, such as the joint recommendations at sectoral level made by UNI Europe, the Global Union, and the World Employment Confederation Europe. So they have issued these recommendations for the temporary agency work industry, where we find usually a lot of migrant workers as well. So, and then the second good practice is about the Association of Labor Providers, who's also set up spare workers availability portal and the sessional workers needed portal to support displaced workers to be transferred to where work is available. So just a few examples of good practices, and those are important to underline as well. Now, to conclude, we see that countries are seeking to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and to build back better, and also for all of their citizens and the migrant workers. So the ILO remains a dedicated partner in your efforts and your continued commitments to implement the Global Compact on migration. So I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boven, for those contributions. I am delighted now to offer the floor to His Excellency Mr. Berzan Nurinbekov, who is the Minister of Labour in the Republic of Kazakhstan. So please, Mr. Nurinbekov.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа. Слышно ли меня?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? I apologize for the temporary technical difficulty that we faced. Unfortunately, I had to go to a different office. I'd like to greet you once again and to thank you for the opportunity to speak at this conference. Kazakhstan, as you well know, is the country of transit and destination for many migrants. And we are an active participants of many global processes. We're committed to implementing all international agreements in the area of protection of rights and freedoms of migrants and ordinary people. And in this regard, I would like to brief you on what Kazakhstan is doing in order to allow and enable migrants to realize fully their potential. First and foremost, Kazakhstan has established a coordination council on sustainable development, which is aimed at the implementation of the sustainable development goals set by the UN under two areas, people and prosperity. We're also implementing a new concept of migration policy until 2021, which is called to set out strategic goals and objectives and a hybrid system of migration management. This should enable us to implement a systemic approach to managing migration flows, to liberalize our social and economic policies, to regularize this status of migrants, enable us to forecast migration in a more accurate way. In the context of implementation of the Global Compact, Kazakhstan is working hard to improve its labor and migration legislation, to simplify its visa regime, to issue invitations and all kinds of documents for migrants. We have currently cancelled a temporary registration for all categories of foreign nationals who come to the country and stay until 30 days. We have introduced a visa-free regime up to 30 days for 73 countries and multilaterally for 54 states. We have established migration services centers across the country. This has allowed to reduce a visa process until several hours. We have also implemented an e-visa project involving 170 states. Nationals of 117 states can obtain a visa electronically. Also, we have simplified the entry into our country of foreign nationals who are investors. We have cancelled and repealed migration cards for all foreign nationals once they enter our border control area. This has reduced bureaucracy. In addition, in the context of Objective 2, we are implementing a state program aimed at promoting entrepreneurship. Internal migration in Kazakhstan accounts for over 1 million people. We are also stimulating internal relocation of people and have set up a social package in order to facilitate relocation for people moving from one region to another. Kazakhstan is committed to long-term migration by ethnic returnees. Over 1 million ethnic returnees have come back to Kazakhstan. In addition, we have signed a joint declaration on the impact of COVID-19 epidemic on migrants. And we have adopted stabilizing anti-crisis measures in order to curb the pandemic and protect the rights of migrants. We have regularized the status of 147,000 foreign nationals and have allowed over 150,000 foreign nationals to leave the countries once the epidemic began. Due to the pandemic, the countries of origin and destinations of the Central Asian regions keep their borders closed. A lot of people cannot go back to Kazakhstan. Therefore, we have extended the terms of stay for people who are currently find themselves without a visa in Kazakhstan. And we have made them exempt from the administrative liability for violating this visa regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, we understand perfectly that tackling the problems of migration is impossible on one's own. We have to exercise a joint approach in order to resolve migration issues. Kazakhstan, together with the International Organization for Migration and the UNHCR, have initiated in 2011 a regional dialogue called the Alma-Ata process. Presently, this regional initiative includes 7 states, and 2 states are its observers. Within this initiative, we are studying the impact of migration, develop monitoring process and measures for protecting migrants' rights. To this end, we propose, in order to make the coordination of the realization of objectives of the Global Compact more effective, to use the platform of our interregional UN SDG Center for the Central Asian states and Kazakhstan. In conclusion, I would like to assure you that within the framework of the Global Compact, Kazakhstan will continue its active efforts in order to further integrate the objectives of the Compact in our national migration policy, to improve our national legislation in the area of protection of rights and freedoms of migrants, to minimize the risks and remove the vulnerability factors faced by migrators. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Minister Nurinbekov, for that intervention. We've had 3 very rich opening statements. I'll now hand to the technical moderator.
Thank you, Andrew. So with this, we open the floor for comments and questions. So the speakers list is opened. We have had about 15 registered speakers. If you wish to take the floor, please press the request to speak button or write us a message. I will call the first 4 speakers and see if they are online. That is Ambassador for Migration Issues of France. We have the Spanish delegate, the UK, Richard Taylor, if he's online, and then we have Germany, Stefanie Schaaf. I give the floor to the UK, Richard Taylor.
Thank you, Julian. Can people hear me?
Yes, very well.
That's great, thank you. Well, apologies, I'm afraid I just made it in, so I've missed the interventions from the panel. Nonetheless, we would like to make a few remarks. Firstly, to say thank you to the Secretariat for arranging this and persevering through some of these technical difficulties. We in the UK have found this an extremely useful process, the whole review process. We recommend our review to you. It's on the website. We hope you find it informative, and we'd be very happy to discuss it with any one of you further. It's come at a very important time for us, as everyone is aware. The UK will shortly be leaving the European Union. So from January next year, we are launching a new immigration system, completely new. This will create a new migration pathway into the UK. It will treat EU and non-EU citizens equally, and it will offer new flexibility and new opportunities for skilled migrant workers wishing to come to the United Kingdom. We're also working to make this system as simple and transparent as possible. So we hope this provides some useful material for reflection as part of this review, and an opportunity in the UK for us to further some of our GCM commitments. Turning to our international work, the review has provided an important reminder to all of us that the choice to move is often not voluntary, and as highlighted under Objective 2, countries need to look at the complex drivers behind such choices. In our review, the UK review, we have highlighted some of the programming that we are undertaking in countries of origin to reduce the adverse drivers that compel people to move. I would particularly highlight our work on climate, which we know is an increasingly important factor and will come into sharp focus at next year's COP26 summit here in the UK. We would also like to reflect on the evidence base for some of our work. We are very keen to work with partners in this area, and we have recently completed a review of academic evidence, which we would be very happy to share. We have also highlighted our work to increase the economic benefits of regular migration, as covered by Objectives 5 and 18. Domestically, I'm pleased that in addition to our new points-based immigration system, we have launched a special visa regime for health and social care workers, and we will shortly launch a new route for graduates. Together, these routes will provide new opportunities for students and global health professionals. Let me conclude by thanking the Secretariat again for convening this meeting. We look forward to the next phase of the GCM, hopefully in a post-COVID world, and we are encouraged to hear how much good work has been going on and what we can do together. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for the UK. I'll give the floor now to Germany. Ms. Schaaf, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Also, I have to apologize due to technical difficulties. I missed the panel. Sorry for that. I hope my intervention is not too much repetition of what was already said in the panel. I also would like to thank the Secretariat, the UN Network on Migration, and the UNECE for convening this meeting. I believe it's very timely, and it's very good to have this opportunity for exchange, even if it's only happening virtually. State Minister Niels Annen, in his introductory remarks, was already spelling out the German position on the review and the GCM as such. I would like to complement this intervention by a little bit, by adding a perspective of the German development policy, and highlight that we are, of course, very much aware of the current global challenges and with the COVID-19 crisis, with the global pandemics, for countries of origins, for countries of destination, but first and foremost also for the people, for migrants themselves. And we are convinced that those challenges can only be addressed together with the strength of multilateralism and of global solidarity. With the GCM, we have a global framework in place to shape globalization, to tackle global crises, and to harness the positive effects of migration and global mobility for development. German development policy follows a comprehensive 360-degree approach regarding migration and development, ranging from mitigating the root causes for forced displacement and irregular migration, support to host countries and countries of origin, to contributing to pathways for safe, orderly, and regular migration. I would like to focus my intervention on GCM Objective 2, minimizing root causes, with a specific look at the impact of COVID-19, fragility trends, the gender perspective, and the role of the diaspora. While COVID-19 presents significant health risks, the socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic are likely to be even more devastating than the disease itself. The World Bank projects that COVID-19 could push up to 150 million additional people into extreme poverty by 2021. This is a serious risk and danger for our joint goal to leave no one behind. Conflict, hunger, migration, and displacements are closely intertwined. This was also shown very prominently by the recent joint WFP-IOM report. Also, the recently published OECD States of Fertility report underlines responding efficiently to the impact of COVID-19 and compounding challenges means responding effectively to fertility. Therefore, Germany is convinced that we need to integrate the nexus of humanitarian assistance, development cooperation, and peace-building efforts as a cross-cutting issue into all our activities, including into the implementation of the GCM. We are looking forward to a strong leadership role of the UN network on migration in this regard. Building back better needs to be also a principle for the implementation of the GCM. The impact of COVID-19 on migrant women has been especially severe. Germany would like to contribute, in the framework of the GCM, but also beyond, to a gender-responsive approach to migration and development. I would like to commend UN Women for the successful implementation of the joint project with the BMZ on making migration safe for women. The last point I would like to mention is the cooperation with the Diaspora and migrant organizations. This is key to our German efforts to support GCM Objective 2. Through a specific migration and diaspora program, Germany harnesses the potential of diaspora engagement to drive social and economic development in 22 partner countries. And this program also, for example, assists diaspora entrepreneurs in founding startups and thus contribute to economic development in their countries of origin. German development policy will continue to contribute to the implementation of the GCM. To support this goal, I am glad that we were able to announce a new German pledge to the MPTF with a volume of 4 million euro. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Spain.
Yes, hello colleagues. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear and see you, sir. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the organizers for this meeting, which so far is proving extremely fruitful and timely. Dear colleagues, in line with what the Spanish Prime Minister said in his speech during the International Conference of the United Nations, which led to the adoption of the Global Compact, Spain, I can assure you, will collaborate in the balanced implementation of the 23 objectives of Pact. Since then, each action and project identified and implemented by the government, and in particular by the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration, are in line with the objectives of this compact. It should be noted that, as Antonio Vitorino, the DG has stressed this morning, the crisis situation caused by COVID-19 has involved the adoption of certain measures in the field of migration to respond to this situation caused by the pandemic. First, we must recognize the right to work in key sectors of migrants legally present in our countries, but who were not allowed to work under the migratory status. Second, automatic extensions of residence permit. Third, being more flexible in the renewal processes, measures which are shared in their objectives with the Global Compact. Fourth, however, and overall, the COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated the positive contribution of migrants in key sectors, where 13% of workers are immigrants, representing in some occupations up to 1/3 of the workforce. We must never forget that. Having mentioned this, I would like to share with you some specific examples regarding the implementation of Objective number 5. Identifying real opportunities for safe, orderly and regular migration is an objective to be achieved and a priority for Spanish migration policy. Since the adoption of the Global Compact, the following measures could be highlighted. On one hand, the reform of the regulation frameworks, a great national pact for migration. As the Minister of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration has expressed in his various parliamentary appearances, one of the objectives of this legislature is to reach a national pact and a wide consensus on migration in order to promote regular, safe and orderly migration in our country. In this reform, legal pathways provided for will be redesigned and made more flexible in response to the different needs identified. On the other hand, specific projects and programs in the field of regular, safe and orderly migration have been redefined. Firstly, migration for labour purposes. The hiring of seasonal workers for agricultural campaigns, especially from Morocco, has been consolidated as a good practice in circular migration, which takes into account the needs of the labour market in both the country of origin and the country of destination, thus maximising the positive impact of a well-managed migration policy for migrants, for communities and countries of origin and destination. Since the adoption of the Global Compact, rules which govern the procedure of hiring at origin have been updated. The circular migration program with Morocco for the breadfruits campaign in Huelva has been steadily improved. Under this program, thousands of women come to Spain to work every year. The preparation of this campaign and cooperation with the Moroccan labour authorities has been strengthened. And the Moroccan authorities have announced the development of cultural activities for female workers and Spanish classes to improve their experience. Meetings with social partners in the province of Huelva and with non-governmental organizations have also been increased. There are going to be mediators who develop social work and permanent contact with women workers. They will thus help them in their needs and will be at their disposal in the face of any doubts or problems that may arise. The preventive monitoring of the state security forces and the labour and social security inspection will be enhanced. The companies themselves have developed an ethical, labour and social responsibility plan, and the State Secretariat for Migration will demand a commitment for transparency from these companies. A circular migration programme with Senegal for the agricultural sector was also launched last year, 2019. And with regards for visas, in line with international commitments, a new formula for the management of migratory flows has been promoted, in which the administration facilitates the international job matching. Secondly, as far as migration for studies and training purposes, together with Morocco, we have identified a legal migration project that combines several elements that fall within the Global Compact on Migration, promoting channels for regular migration, enhancing cooperation between the actors involved, making migrants agents of change, addressing reintegration needs, minimizing the negative effects of the brain drain. These projects, in which the Secretariat of State for Migration and the Ministry of Universities participate jointly, consists of facilitating young Moroccan graduates to enter Spain to develop postgraduate studies with the possibility of doing related internships in key areas and sectors for the development of Morocco, which have been decided by the Moroccan authorities themselves, so that the training and work they do in Spain enhances the development of their country of origin. Participants will also have to design a project related to the studies carried out, which could be launched in Morocco after the completion of their master's degree. The top 10 projects are expected to receive up to €10,000 for implementation. These projects also include pre-departure activities, and a contact point has been designated for participants during their stay in Spain, thus improving information on the migration process. These projects also contribute to objectives 2E and 3E. And finally, we have been working in a specific program focused on women from rural areas of Morocco. As I've said before, thousands of women from rural areas of Morocco travel every year to southern Spain to take part in the harvest season, many coming year after year, and thus filling the labour shortages in the agriculture sector that we face. In particular, this scheme has been offering for almost a decade an opportunity to seasonal workers to make a living in Spain with all due guarantees, contracts, payroll, social security, in brief, enjoying all the rights that Spanish workers are entitled to. However, these women, upon return to Morocco, remain in a precarious situation, as most of them lack a stable income which generate an income-generating activity that may offer them a financial and economic independence. In fact, they usually live on the salaries they earned while in Spain to sustain themselves and their family members. Thus, in order to offer them a chance to grow and overcome vulnerability, this project will support them launch income-generating activities in the form of micro-enterprises and cooperatives through a training program in Spain and financial and technical support upon return. This way, we will completing and complementing the cycle of migration with an effective reintegration in Morocco. As a whole, this pilot project aims to turn these seasonal workers into economic empowered women, providing them with the tools they need to capitalize their experience and become their own employers. Lastly, by strengthening the capacities of the Moroccan authorities and incorporating great institutions and their foundations, we hope all these examples could be of interest to you, and they show the high commitment of Spain in defining regular, safe and orderly migration pathways. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this statement. I now invite a technician to play a video from the Uzbekistan Senate's chairperson, Ms. Tansila Norbaeva.
Уважаемый господин Витарино, уважаемые дамы и господа, участники конференции. Рада приветствовать вас на этом важном для всех нас мероприятии. Хочу особо отметить, что для Узбекистана имеет важное значение сотрудничество с международным...
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to greet you at this regional review. For Uzbekistan, the cooperation with the IOM is very important. We have joined last year the organization as its full member, and we welcome the signing in October 2020 of the cooperation agreement with the IOM, as well as the decision of the organization to expand its presence in our country by opening an office in Tashkent. I'm delighted that the signing ceremony of this agreement coincided with my October visit to Geneva, where I was able to meet and hold excellent talks with the head of the IOM, Mr. Vitorino, and the head of the UNECE, Ms. Algaerova. Our country is making its valuable contribution by supporting the regional and global cooperation initiatives in the area of international migration. We were the first, or among the first, who supported the Global Compact on safe, orderly, and regular migration. We were among the first to provide information on the measures aimed at the implementation of the GCM at the national level. I would like to underline that Uzbekistan is actively developing its efficient migration management system. Our president, Mr. Mirziyev, attributes great importance to the issues of migration at the national as well as international level. As a means of regulating the operation of private employment agencies, in August 2020, Uzbekistan adopted amendments to its laws on private employment agencies. From now on, the agencies will provide employment services to those seeking work abroad free of charge. The cost of their services will be paid for by the employers. In September 2020, the President of Uzbekistan issued a decree which seeks to improve the work of the authorities responsible for the international working migration, as well as the skills or training of those who wish to work abroad, to protect the rights of migrants during their stay abroad, and to assure their employment upon their return home. It also includes the social support to the members of their families. As of January 2021, a procedure for compulsory professional training of work migrants will be introduced. For this purpose, we will relaunch new centers for short-term training courses and vocational education across the country. All in all, in 2020-2021, more than 74,000 people will undergo training funded by the state. Dear colleagues, we welcome the implementation by the IOM a number of regional projects, including in Uzbekistan. As you may know, in 2020, the IOM decided to implement 1 national and 4 regional projects, costing a total of $1 million. They will include establishing a pilot skills upgrade center intended for potential work migrants, engaging fruitful dialogue with the diaspora, combating human trafficking, protecting migrant children, and improving our transport infrastructure. Dear participants of the conference, we share the idea that Presently, the international community needs to stand united in order to counteract the consequences of the pandemic. We believe it is important to enhance our joint efforts in order to solve problems in the area of work migration and to define future objectives. I would like to emphasize that Uzbekistan is committed to continue to fulfill its international obligations, including the complete implementation of all the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I hope to continue our fruitful cooperation with the International Organization for Migration and the UNECE and wish you all the very best. I'm confident that this conference will result in a number of useful and relevant recommendations. Thank you for your attention.
Some remote thanks to Uzbekistan, to the Senate's chairperson, Ms. Tanzila Norbaeva, for this video. And next on the list, we have a pre-recorded statement from the Russian Federation, from Ms. Valentina Kazakova, Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Dear forum participants, colleagues, first of all, I would like to greet all the participants of this forum and express my gratitude for the invitation. The Russian Federation positively assesses the efforts of the United Nations Global Network on Migration in the implementation of the Global Compact, which we hope will help streamline migration processes and increase the international cooperation in the area. We reaffirm our position that the Global Compact is regarded by the Russian Federation as a set of recommendations to be used within the framework of domestic legislation and in accordance with the international obligations of the Russian Federation. Our country continues to take measures consistent with the goals of the Global Compact aimed at facilitating access to legal migration channels, as well as increasing the degree of certainty and predictability of migration. It should be noted that in the Russian Federation, at the legislative level, measures are being taken to optimize migration processes. Mutually beneficial conditions are being created for the sustainable development of legal migration, and migration procedures are being simplified for migrants wishing to reside in the Russian Federation. An important milestone in the development of Russia's migration policy was the approval by the President of the Russian Federation of the concept of state migration policy until 25, which sets the vector for further actions of the state in the field of migration. This concept is a roadmap for migration. The modernization of public administration in the field of migration will affect all aspects of migration legal relations, including the stay of foreign citizens and stateless persons in Russia, labor migration, and the exercise of control and supervisory functions. Fundamental changes are envisaged in migration legislation through its systematization. It is planned to revise approaches to the legal regulation of the procedure for the stay of foreign citizens in Russian Federation, the current procedure for the application of restrictive measures against persons who have violated migration rules, such as not allowing entry into the Russian Federation and the undesirability of staying in the country and expulsion. In order to create a migration situation that meets the interests of the Russian Federation, it is planned to introduce the mechanisms of short-term and long-term stay in Russia. In order to improve the quality of data on migration processes, as well as to improve the system of state management of migration processes based on the parameters of the analysis of migration situation, reflecting its impact on the economic, social, cultural, national, ethno-confessional, and other aspects of the life of the Russian society, monitoring of the migration situation has been organized, allowing to provide the state authorities of the Russian Federation with relevant and objective data for making administrative decisions in the field of migration. As part of improving the availability and accessibility of public services in the area of migration, measures are being taken to ensure remote access for such services. The Russian Federation is making efforts to ensure that all migrants have legal identity documents and other proper documents, and the acquisition of Russian citizenship by stateless persons residing on its territory is encouraged. I would also like to highlight the work done by the Russian Federation to simplify access to legal migration channels and increasing their flexibility. In recent years, a significant number of amendments has been introduced to the legislation of the Russian Federation aimed at simplifying migration procedures, such as issuing temporary residence permits to foreign citizens and stateless persons and their migration registration. Currently, work is underway to improve the legislation on citizenship of the Russian Federation, aimed at simplifying the procedure for acquiring Russian citizenship, and work is also underway to improve the institution of asylum. Promoting the fair and ethical recruitment of workers and ensuring the conditions for decent work for migrants is one of the priorities for the Russian Federation. In connection with the spread of the new coronavirus infection in Russia, additional steps are being taken to reduce epidemiological risks among foreign citizens and stateless persons. First of all, this is the decree of the President of the Russian Federation, which has temporarily suspended the validity of a number of instruments in Russia. These measures are truly essential for targeted support of foreign citizens and stateless persons in the Russian Federation in the current difficult epidemiological situation. Dear colleagues, let me underline the commitment of the Russian Federation to a policy of strengthening international cooperation and global partnership to ensure safe, orderly, and legal migration. Thank you for your attention.
I'd like to thank for that statement from the Russian Federation. Next on the speakers list, I have still Ambassador for Migration Issues of France, Pascal Teixeira. If you wish to take the floor, please come ahead. And then next in the speakers list is Voices of Young Refugees in Europe, Maria Chauger, if you're online. Then we would have Mr. Herbert Beck, Public Services International, followed by Laura Morel, Secours Catholique Caritas France. I do not see France asking for the floor. Next on the list, Voices of Young Refugees in Europe. If not, then I go further to Mr. Herbert Beck. You have the floor, sir. Please press the request to speak button. There you are, and unmute your microphone.
Okay, thank you for giving me the floor. I'm speaking on behalf of Public Services International, the global federation of public service trade unions. I'm focusing my intervention on objectives 6, 15, and 18 of the GCM. Public service workers are uniquely placed on promoting human rights, safety, and decent work for all workers, including migrant workers, while also being at the front line defending inclusive and non-discriminatory access of all migrants to qualified public services. The pandemic brings evidence to why well-resourced and adequately staffed public services are crucial in fighting a public health crisis. This holds true as we'll continue to fight other health crises, climate disasters, and emergency in the future. Public service workers are frontline essential workers providing emergency response, healthcare, social services, municipal services, including access to water, sanitation, and other basic needs. We represent these workers within our membership across the world, including in Europe and North America. We share the experience of how our workers have been struggling in the face of the pandemic and other disasters in providing public services for all. Our health sector unions have been tirelessly fighting for safety and decent working conditions, including access to PPEs for all health workers so they can continue delivering care and treatment for COVID-19 patients. Migrant workers, especially women, migrant workers represent a significant number of health and social care workers at the frontiers. In the USA, the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, was recognized with the Humanitarian Service Award from among civil society. Union members, among them women migrant workers, are on the front lines of this COVID-19 pandemic, and many of them have suffered infections and others have lost their lives. In Europe, the European Federation of Public Service Unions, EPSU, established from among its affiliates all over Europe a European network of workers involved in the reception of migrants and refugees. The European Care Network gives voice to workers dealing with the reception of migrants and refugees. It aims to strengthen European links, support workers in delivering a public service of hospitality that respects the dignity and rights of migrants and asylum seekers, and provide a platform to discuss migration policy development at the European and national levels. 2 weeks ago, EPSU led a European Week of Action calling EU leaders for higher levels of staffing and wages in the health and social care sector with the EU for Health program as an urgent measure as we battle the second wave of pandemic. In Europe, as well as North America, our unions join forces with civil society in fighting privatization of prisons and migrant detention centers, where migrants are disproportionately and most negatively affected, deprived of their rights to liberty and subjected to inhumane conditions, including deprivation of their right to health in the midst of the pandemic. These are only some of the examples of the work of our unions in upholding our commitment as PSI to access the quality public services for all. Furthermore, in ensuring access to services, it's important that workers delivering the service are able to fully exercise their human and labor rights, including access to safe and decent working conditions and to fair and ethical recruitment. PSI works with our health sector unions in ensuring that health workers are able to enjoy these rights. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown the vital need for adequate numbers of health workers to provide universal health care services. It also highlighted the important role and contribution that migrant health workers have made to the COVID-19 crisis. Yet, despite these deaths and them being sung as heroes, our health workers continue to work in dangerous and difficult conditions. They are undervalued, uncompensated, and unprotected. Across the world, health workers are on strike demanding their rights and safety at work, for just compensation, for social protection, for their inclusion in decision-making, and for funding of public health services. Fighting for these rights is what our unions are doing across Europe and North America and across the globe. We continue to build solidarity and support of our unions in upholding these rights through promotion of social dialogue, organizing, mobilization, industrial actions, as well as advocacy at various levels, including at EU level, for COVID-19 to be recognized as an occupational disease. We support the work of our unions in engaging in bilateral labor migration agreements, such as the example of the Germany-Philippines BLA on nurses. We are also doing proactive work around global skills partnerships, which is part of Objective 18, and are building the capacity of our unions in understanding GSP and in bringing our experience into these discussions. PSI fully agrees that the GCM is a living framework providing guidance to member states and all stakeholders as we battle through this pandemic and beyond. We look to the GCM guidance on how we can build back better together to promote human rights and just and redistribute social policies and public services that support inclusive and welcoming societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beck, for that statement. Next on the list, I try to give back the floor to Voices of Young Refugees in Europe, to Mr. Elia Melul. You are on the panel, please.
Yes.
Unmute your mic and turn on your camera if you want. There you are.
Dear participants, thank you so much for giving me the floor and for the opportunity to report the youth perspective on this important issue and in this meeting. My name is Elina Melul and I'm an EU regional focal point for migration at the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, which is a General Assembly mandated and self-organized space for youth to engage in policy design, review and implementation of sustainable development. This year, we have conducted 2 series of consultation at the regional and national level, focused on UK, Portugal and Germany, where we consulted with 21 youth-led and youth-focused organizations operating in Europe, representing over 4,600 young people, including migrants. We focused on the state of labor migration pathway and on GCM Objectives 7, 15 and 18. We have a policy brief detailing all of our findings, and I will now summarize our results relevant to the Objective 18. Our contribution includes supporting migrants to integrate economically, including by helping them create a CV, find volunteering option, workshop and internship matching their interests and goals, running programs that assist children with their schoolwork and providing classes of intensive languages training, and accompanying family to facilitate the recognition of previous studies and qualification. Given these findings, we have outlined specific asks and priorities. We ask to streamline recognition of foreign qualification and certification. Migrants face significant challenges in access to documentation, which hampers access to common social mobility routes. Commonly, this materializes in an inability to present official certificates due to a lack of access to them. Consequently, qualification recognition ought to be better facilitated and alternate qualification routes introduced. A failure to provide adequate employment and training opportunities forces migrants to repeat schooling and training and to take positions for which they are overqualified. We ask to ensure access to language classes, including by funding already existing organizations delivering this. This is essential to facilitate the integration of migrants. Language classes should be advertised at all entry points and grant access to students without overcrowded issues. Youth call on governments to facilitate administrative procedures regarding apprenticeship. Migration must be able to apply for and begin apprenticeship despite a lack of official residency and regardless of their migratory status. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Milul, for this statement on behalf of the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, Migration Working Group. I now give the floor to Ms. Laura Morel.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. At the first
we can
regional
hear you and see you well.
Thank you very much. So at the first regional review of the Global Compact on Migration is being held, Secours Catholique Caritas France drew the attention of decision makers to a context of multiple crises affecting migrant people who are increasingly vulnerable. Although the Global Compact on Migration offers on paper substantial supporting points on key issues for the protection of migrants' people's rights, there is an important gap between the commitments under the Compact and the reality. Even if the current sanitary crisis related to COVID-19 affects everyone, it weighs heavily on vulnerable people who are migrants. In addition to the crisis itself and its sanitary impacts, the policies put in place to respond to the epidemic have exposed migrants to other crises. The vulnerabilities of migrant people have thus been exacerbated by three crises: a protection crisis, a sanitary crisis, and a socio-economic crisis. From a protection point of view, border closure measures make migratory journeys even more dangerous and greatly undermine access to the right to asylum, protection, and decent living conditions. From a sanitary point of view, migrant people are particularly vulnerable to coronavirus. They are more exposed because they are in the front line in ensuring essential jobs in our societies, and in the housing condition of many people do not often allow the necessary health measures for their protection to be applied. From a socio-economic point of view, migrant people are among the first to lose their jobs, which are often informal. Thus, they lose their income and they benefit from little or none of the social protection measures. It reinforces the poverty of migrants and their families who can no longer receive financial support. At the same time, there is also a crisis of policies that go too often against the rights and protection commitments for migrant people. Thus, in France, Secours Catholique witnesses throughout the country, and particularly at borders, violations of fundamental rights and a lack of access to basic services for migrant people. The situation is the same for many people living in camps and slums on French soil. Secours Catholique is also concerned about the measures proposed by the European Commission on the new European Pact on Migration and Asylum. No reference is made to the Global Compact on Migration. Safe and legal pathways of migration are little developed, such as the access to basic services. In addition, there is another crisis context that has an equally important impact on migrant people: the crisis linked to the effect of climate change. Many people are forced to leave their homes in anticipation or in response to an environmental risk, whether sudden or slow. Impacted populations then find themselves dispossessed of their land and livelihoods, and very often without sufficient financial resources, information on their rights, and safe routes. For people forced to cross-border displacement in this context, there are no adequate legal responses. They are not integrated into existing protection mechanisms. As a result, people move under extremely difficult conditions and their fundamental rights are violated. To respond to the context of multiple crises and the exacerbated vulnerabilities of migrant people, we call for a global governance of migration that effectively protects and respects the rights of these populations. The current context demonstrates once again how essential it is for people to benefit from safe and legal pathways of migration that allow them to move in a way that respects their rights and that protects both the health and health of populations in transit and host countries. To this end, Objective 5 of the Global Compact on Migration, a keystone for the implementation of many of the Compact's objectives, proposes concrete measures to develop safe and legal pathways of migration in respect of human rights for all migrants, taking into account their needs in terms of protection, work, family life. In line with Objective 2, which recognizes the effects of climate change as adverse drivers of migration, Objective 5 proposes measures to address the protection gap for environmental migrants. Secours Catholique Caritas France called therefore on states to engage in national, regional, and international discussions in favor of the development of safe, legal, effective, and accessible pathways of migration for environmental migrants and of the integration into existing protection mechanisms. These discussions should include reflection on the applicability for environmental migrants of humanitarian visas, temporary or permanent protection status, and the principle of non-refoulement. While solutions exist in the Global Compact on Migration, Secours Catholique Caritas France is worried about the policies which go against the rights of migrant people and about the lack of political willingness of some states to concretely implement the Global Compact. Therefore, this regional review and other regional reviews should be key moments during which states, on the one hand, integrate the gaps between the reality of practices and their commitments, and on the other hand, commit themselves to improve their policies. The first International Migration Review Forum will be held in 2022, and it will be unacceptable that substantial progress has not been made in the implementation of the Global Compact for the protection of all migrant people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that statement on behalf of Secours Catholique Caritas France. I'd like to give the floor to a couple of more speakers on the list. Just to remind you, we are close to the final session, final call for speakers, and in the end I'd like to give back the floor to our panel. So if you could please stick to 3 minutes if possible. We'll put up a timer to help you keep the time. So next on my list is Mr. Klaus Chrysler from the city of Mannheim, also speaking on behalf of the Global Forum for Migration and Development Measures Mechanism. Then I have Anne Koch from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, followed by, if he's there, David Joyce from the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. Mr. Chrysler, the floor is yours.
Hello, and I will make it short. Thank you very much for making this possible, and thank you very much to the panelists for this very inspiring interventions that they gave. I want to add the local perspective, because I think especially Mrs. Hornung-Draus made a very differentiated analysis today, and she mentioned integration as a very important field in the whole discussion on the Global Compact on Migration. And integration takes place at the local level, especially in the urban local level. And meanwhile, for example, Germany makes very good progress in the implementation of the Global Compact. This year we passed the federal law on skilled workers immigration, which is, I think, a very important step. And at the local level, we have all the people here, and our main challenge is not those who are qualified workers coming to the cities. It's more about the lower or the non-qualified immigrants which are here, and quantitative, the main path to come to Germany, for example, is family reunification. And at the end, we have the situation that, and the pandemic make this very obvious again, that especially the low-skilled immigrants are a very vulnerable group. They are the first to lose their jobs. And from the urban perspective, it's very important to get more support and give us more the power to work in this field of qualifying people, which finally came to us. It's not about their qualification and from the outside and their acceptance. We do very good progress here. I think it's very important in the field of integration that we, at the local level, have more support in qualifying people who has come to our cities. This is something, it's not only about integration in the labor market, and it's also about a holistic idea of integration, which comes to place at the local level. And a second thing concerning the objective number 2, to minimize the adverse drivers, I think in the international development corporations, also cities can give a very great benefit in the so-called city-to-city corporations when it's about the exchange of ideas and experiences. And when we look at the upcoming conference between the African Union and the European Union, African and European cities are in progress to in a dialogue process that especially in this international development corporations, the work between cities of different continents and so also can be very helpful to minimize these adverse drivers. These were the two remarks I wanted to bring up from the local perspective. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chrysler, bringing in this local perspective. I now give the floor to Ms. Anne Koch from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you to the organizers and thank you to all the previous contributors. I am stepping in for my colleague Steffen Angenent, who due to technical issues can't make this contribution. However, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the implementation of the GCM has been mentioned several times today. I would like to join in with those who have pointed out that it might also be worthwhile to look at the interlinkage between both aspects the other way around. The fact that GCM implementation is in fact of major importance for combating the pandemic. And let me set out how we see that. The pandemic has highlighted the health risks associated with poor and insufficient migration policies. For example, the risks associated with the precarious housing and working conditions of many migrants and refugees. Examples, inter alia, from the German meat and agriculture industries show that infection chains can often be directly attributed to the cramped accommodation of seasonal workers, and we see similar problems in refugee camps across Europe. Moreover, refugees and migrants often do not have sufficient access to healthcare. This problem is particularly pressing for undocumented migrants who often fear the data collection associated with the access to health services. In addition, in the case of irregular migration, infection chains are difficult to trace. Against this background, it is instructive to compare the 23 objectives of the GCM with the WHO proposals on how to strengthen health systems. This comparison brings to light a significant overlap. The GCM objectives contain numerous health-related measures whose implementation could strengthen health systems in countries of origin, transit, and destination. My colleagues and I would like to highlight at least 4 areas where the GCM implementation can contribute to strengthening health systems. First, progress in the collection and analysis of migration data would fill gaps in health information systems, which is crucial for the proper functioning of health systems. Second, improving the conditions for remittances and the portability of social security can contribute to the financing of health systems. Third, the pandemic, as others have pointed out, has proven just how important the work of migrant nurses and doctors is for many European countries. In order to meet the demand for these workers, and at the same time avoid a brain drain in the countries of origin, a critical review of current recruitment practices is needed. In this respect, Objectives 5 and 6 of the GCM, promoting regular migration and an ethical recruitment of labor, can be helpful. In addition, global skills partnerships, which are designed to meet the workforce needs of both countries of origin and of destination, could make a difference. And in the context of the COVID pandemic, many countries have already started to simplify the accreditation process for medical personnel, as suggested by Objective 18 of the GCM. Fourth, access to health services is not just a human right. There's no alternative if the aim is to effectively contain a pandemic like the one we're facing today. This is the only way to track new infections, prevent them from spreading, and treat pre- and post-pandemic diseases. Objective 4 of the GCM, provision of identity documents. Objective 7, reducing vulnerabilities in migration. And Objective 15, ensuring migrants access to basic services, offer important suggestions for coming closer to the goal of universal health coverage. Therefore, European governments should remove the practical and legal obstacles that are preventing migrants and refugees from accessing health services. To sum up, my colleagues and I are convinced that a forward-looking migration policy in line with the GCM objectives that takes into account health-related aspects can strengthen health systems and help to ensure that quality healthcare is available to all, even in crisis situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne, for that intervention. I would like to pass on the floor now to David Joyce. Are you there?
Yes.
Irish Congress of Trade Unions. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll just make a few brief short points on the thematic areas being discussed. In relation to Objective 2, especially in the light of the pandemic, debt cancellation and the removal of conditionalities for IFI loans will be critical for recovery and building resilience in developing economies already suffering from both the loss of talent and the huge drop in remittances. Trade and investment policies relying on so-called incentivization of foreign direct investment have also undermined domestic industries and displaced workers from decent jobs. Workers faced with no possibility to earn enough to support themselves and their families can be compelled to seek work in other countries despite the risks that may be involved. In relation to Objectives 5 and 12, just let me say a few words, if I may, on the draft new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. From trade union perspective, the Pact regrettably has not provided us with the fresh start needed, but continues perpetuating the previous security-based approach with a strong focus on border control, deterrence, detention, and deportations while leaving very little room for proposals in the area of regular migration. Trade unions across Europe stand for the rights of all migrants, including asylum seekers, refugees, and undocumented migrants. And we call for all member states to uphold their obligations to provide legal protection to asylum seekers and not to return them to a country where they face serious threats to their life or freedom. The Pact, as presented, enables member states to breach their international responsibilities by allowing them to sponsor the deportation of protection seekers. And I'm afraid it reads more like a pact against migration by reaffirming a sort of central EU objective of reducing massively the number of asylum seekers to be admitted to Europe. And unions will continue to push for a universal human rights approach with significantly increased trade and regular migration channels for asylum seekers and others to enter Europe. In terms of Objective 6, social dialogue involving both social partners is key. I note in passing that this particular panel has reps from government, employers and the ILO, but not a trade union rep on the panel. But I do welcome the opportunity to speak in this way. We've been calling for adequate regulation of recruitment agencies to reduce the risk of abuses, which can range from deception concerning job offers to often exorbitant fees being charged to migrant workers, to trafficking. Ensuring decent work creation in countries of origin, transit and destination is essential, and workers' organisations can contribute to the development of the necessary active labour market policies. My time is up, I know, so I think I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot for that statement, these recommendations. Dear participants, we are about to end this session with I'd like to give back to the panel for some closing remarks. I'd like to thank everyone who participated. Those who were not able to speak, please send us your comments, questions via email. They will be reflected. We will be having a report of this review. So please send them us via email. Apologies that we could not take everyone on the speakers list. I'd like to give back the floor to Andrew Geddes and the panel for some final reflections and remarks. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and many thanks to all the speakers from the floor for their contributions. I think it's provided a very valuable exchange of practices and also of ideas that reaffirms the value of the compact. And I'll keep it very short because I want to go back to the panel. But I think we've heard quite a lot of powerful insight on in relation to objective 2 around structural factors, adverse drivers. There's been mention of climate, but also of a range of other factors that can either be causes of vulnerability for migrants or perhaps also promote resilience. We've learned a lot at a practical level about the pathways that exist, ideas that are being developed. I think it's been particularly important, the whole of society, or a kind of affirmation of a whole of society approach, and the importance of stakeholders and positive contributions from a range of stakeholders, including, of course, trade unions, employers' organizations, the private sector, and migrant associations. And I think that's the value of that has been, again, reaffirmed. And also, I think in relation to the challenges presented by the pandemic across all of the objectives that we have been discussing here, I think it's important to recognize the major challenges, but also the way in which the compact itself can provide solutions and ways forward through dialogue and exchange, such as the one we've engaged in this afternoon. So there are far too many excellent points to condense into a short overview, but I would like to thank everybody and also allow our panelists to come back in for any final observations that they have. So I will, can we hand back to the Minister for Labour in Kazakhstan? Is that possible?
Andrew, I think they left us. I guess the minister had to leave.
So I would like to offer the floor to Ms. Liva Verboven from the ILO for her final remarks.
Yes, hello. Thank you all, to participants and colleagues on the panel as well. There's a lot to take away. I will not infringe a lot on your time. I think, Andrew, you've summarized it very well. And I also want to recognize what the last speaker on the list from the trade union, the Irish trade union, has said. Social dialogue is key with this, but this is more than that. It's with dialogue with all stakeholders, also beyond the traditional social partners. Some key words for me were fairness, resilience, dialogue, and yes, implementation of the Global Compact is key, and it gives us that framework, and we should continue this work, and we stand ready to do that with all the other organizations and with you all. So thanks a lot for this, and success for the remaining sessions. Over.
So thank you very much, Ms. Verboven. I think that now concludes this round table. I'd like to thank the participants and all those who intervened. Thank you, and a good day to all of you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, panelists. On behalf of the UN Network on Migration and UNECE, we'd like to thank all participants of this roundtable for their participation. This roundtable is now closed. I invite everyone to stay on for a summary of day 1 of the review, which will be done by Ambassador Donaghy. I hope he's with us. And I'd like to ask him to come to the floor. There he is. Thank you. Most of you probably know Mr. Donaghy. He has served as Irish ambassador in Russia, Germany, and Austria. He was Director General of Ireland's Development Cooperation Program. He also served as Political Director. In his role as permanent representative of Ireland to the UN in New York, he helped to facilitate the adoption of the 2030 Agenda and the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants. Ambassador Donegan retired from the Irish Foreign Service in September 2017, but remains actively involved in pushing forward these issues and contributes to the work of a number of think tanks and academic institutions. We're honored to have you, sir, for a summary of day one. Thank you. Could you please unmute your microphone? It's in the middle of the screen.
Got you, yeah.
Thank you. We can
Thank
hear
you very much. Thank you very much, Julian. It's a great honor to have been asked to sum up the day's proceedings. It's been a very rich session so far, and it bodes very well for the first regional review of the Global Compact. I was fortunate enough to be associated with the New York Declaration, which in effect gave birth to the two Global Compacts, and I had an involvement from a civil society perspective with the actual the negotiation of the Global Compact. It's wonderful to see this first opportunity to take stock of how it has gone so far. This morning, the Director General of the IOM and coordinator of the UN Migration Network spoke very encouragingly of the progress which has been made so far, and he made the point that most international migration in fact takes place within regions. So it's very important that we get the regional review of the compact underway, and it is good that the UNECE region is taking the floor first, and more will follow next year. I think it was the German Minister of State this morning who said that today, in effect, that the review fills the compact with life, and we have seen that throughout the discussions today, beginning with the opening session and going on into two very stimulating round tables. And I look forward very much to the second day and the further round tables we'll have then. I suppose the COVID-19 pandemic gives added urgency and relevance really to what we're doing. I was struck by one comment made in the final in the second round table a moment ago when Anne Koch talked about how the pandemic in effect gives that the GCM is the way to actually respond to the pandemic, that whether it is strengthening health systems and ensuring access for migrants to basic services, that the GCM in itself is almost like a blueprint for responding to the pandemic. And I think that's the kind of notes of optimism which struck me most during the day, that the pandemic is basically an opportunity as much as a challenge, and I think a lot of the interventions reflected that there are ways in which we see migrant workers quite rightly being identified as key workers in the pandemic context, and this is accelerating procedures for recognition of their qualifications. It's accelerating basic equality, which we have long advocated for, and which is set out clearly in the GCM. So all of that is very encouraging, and I think some speakers also emphasize the potential of technology to fast forward on some of the changes which we all agreed to in the Global Compact. The whole of society approach has been emphasized by many speakers, and this is quite right. This is in fact the only way in which we will tackle the many forms of discrimination and injustice from which migrants suffer, particularly the most vulnerable migrants. We had very valuable proposals made by a whole range of civil society speakers, both this morning and this afternoon, quite detailed recommendations about ways in which the measures which we envisaged under the Global Compact could be strengthened, could be extended. And I found all of those very interesting. I mean, like Andrew Geddes, it would be difficult, perhaps invidious, to pick out particular points made in the course of the two roundtables, but there's a lot to reflect on from the stakeholder interventions. That, of course, was one of the major purposes of today's review and indeed of the consultations which preceded it. I think those interventions also helped to show some of the limitations of the compact, and not just because he is a fellow countryman, but I was struck by what David Joyce of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions said just now. It was Antonio Vitorino who made the point, I think, that we should see the two-day session as an occasion to look at successes so far, but also to be self-critical, to recognise we haven't gone as far as we could. I think that in the first round table, there were a number of points which struck me as particularly strong. One was that if you like, we have an opportunity under the pandemic to pursue implementation of the compact in all of its provisions, but also to look at ways in which we can do things to imagine new ways of doing things. We have a new context. Issues like increased access to basic services, to healthcare, to ways of enabling remittances. These are now more urgent in the new context than they were beforehand. And so without being too rosy-eyed, I think the opportunity aspect is as important as the hopefully short-term challenges faced. And we're all quite clear on the problems created for migrants in terms of a freeze on mobility, on the increased inequalities, on the vulnerabilities. That has been well articulated. But I think the positive recognition that there are ways in which we can accelerate progress because of the pandemic. And I think that's what I took away today. The potential of cities and local governments, that was brought out very well. The importance of coordination, collaboration, and coherence across all the systems dealing with migration. The UN has set a good example by setting up the UN Migration Network, but coherence within regions, within countries, cooperation across regions, I think all of that came through clearly. The particular predicament of groups such as children, women, migrant workers, I picked those out, but I thought that some powerful advocacy was delivered on behalf of individual communities. And then there was also much emphasis on the role, on what we need to do in individual sectors, health, education, and so on. Roundtable 2 ranged over a wide set of issues around labour, mobility and migration, fair recruitment, recognition of skills, and it also, I think, underlined importantly that bilateral cooperation is in many respects it's something which has to be built out further. We need more and more bilateral agreements covering specific areas of importance for migrants. Adverse drivers of migration were highlighted by a number of the contributions. Cooperation with countries of origin, and climate change, the impact of climate change on many vulnerable migrants, the importance of debt relief. These are among the issues which were articulated in the second session. I might finish just by really thanking all those who organised today's session and who contributed to the three main segments: the introductory part, the two roundtables. I found it very, very enriching and stimulating, and you rose very well to the technical challenges. And I have to say it was a great first day. Thank you very much. I look forward to tomorrow.
Thank you very much for that sum up of day one. We look forward to hearing from you tomorrow morning in the recap. So this resumes day 1 of the GCM regional review for the Europe region. We get back together tomorrow morning. Roundtable 3 will start at 10. And you should all have received the links. We are hopeful tomorrow morning we start as scheduled. That would be 10. I think, and I'll look to the technical colleagues. They confirm. Yeah, the platform will be open from 9 onwards. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the Kudo platform will be open. You will all be able to access it. And those colleagues who have not joined a familiarization session will be able to do so tomorrow morning from 9 to 10. With this, I close this meeting and thank everyone, especially Professor Danigi and the roundtable panelists and the moderator, Andrew Geddes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.